Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at InfoTools. Today, we're joined by Johann Bittner, private equity consulting lead at Loyalty Research Center, a research consultancy that specializes in the collection and analysis of primary data across distribution channels, customers, prospects, and competitors to support strategic planning and value creation for the lower middle market. In his current role, Johann leads a team of consultants across commercial and customer diligence, voice of customer, and prospect analytics to support new product service go-to-market. Prior to this, Johann spent the early parts of his career focused on marketing technology and analytics as a management consultant with KPMG. It was during that experience working with larger enterprises that he saw firsthand the opportunity to unlock new value for smaller businesses by taking similar approaches to centering sales and marketing efforts around hard-to-reach primary data. Over the past few months, Loyalty Research partnered with Rep Data, a full-service data collection firm for quantitative primary research, to understand how recent trends against cookie-based tracking have impacted marketing organizations that currently rely on cookies for their campaign strategies. Thanks for joining us on the show, Johann.
Likewise. Thanks, Michael. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
No problems. So, Johann, what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
Not just as a consumer, but kind of also in our current role, we've been closely monitoring those recent trends towards privacy. So for the example, kind of the removal of storages, attitudes against storages, and kind of what we're starting to see from major browsers like Google and Bing. Not just for the sake of how it impacts our clients and how they're able to deliver, but also because we anticipate that this will significantly change the course of market research. It's funny, we had several PE organizations over the past year reach out about understanding the implications of these trends as they're starting to work through budgeting across their portfolio. What we uncovered was that leading organizations are making significant changes to both their campaign strategies and technology stack, but one thread was consistent: a heightened importance of primary data, and we're starting to see a resurgence of the traditional market research that's related.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. I know full well the impact that this huge cookie change has had, and it's still been felt by many, especially those who were heavily reliant on what many call vanity metrics, such as low purchase intent traffic on their websites, etc., and holding that high up on their metrics, etc., which is interesting. So I'm keen to dig into this further, and particularly the study you commissioned with Rep Data. But before we do, could you tell us a bit more about Loyalty Research Center and your areas of expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. So our team at LRC, Loyalty Research Center, is headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana, and has served clients across associations, B2B, B2C, and private equity over the last 25 years. So we're kind of work across a full scope of services, including member engagement on the association side, voice of customer, and marketing analytics. Our core focus is on measuring the strength of relationships and prioritizing those experiences based on what will have the strongest impact, be it member engagement kind of within the association and nonprofit sector, or customer loyalty on the B2B and B2C side. We have found that loyal customers kind of during the course of this research account for 60% of enterprise value, exhibit higher retention, greater referral patterns, both in probability and number, increased share of spend, and overall lower price sensitivity. Identifying those customers and what drives their evaluation, maybe product, service, or a particular attribute, is a critical component of what we do to identify those growth opportunities within an organization.
Cool. So I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't give a bit of context as to what cookies are, and perhaps what practices were going on prior to this big change. Could you share some light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually really funny. The origin of the cookie was actually a JavaScript error as Brendan Eich was developing JavaScript. And so what it was is a flaw in the system that allowed the original domain to kind of track visitors across behaviors by kind of storing that cookie on your machine or laptop or kind of whatever you're navigating on, be it a phone or another device. And so that has had a profound impact of kind of what we've seen both in the marketing industry, but more particularly around advertising technology. And so we all think of those examples where Instagram or the social media platform that we're using is spying on us. But what's actually kind of going on there is kind of the usage of these cookies for areas like cart abandonment and retargeting. And so the example I like to use is, maybe I was shopping for my girlfriend on Macy's. I was on my phone at home. I left something in the cart. I wasn't actually logged in, so they don't technically know what user I am. But then I see an advertisement on my laptop that points to that exact same item. And so that's kind of driven by cookie and has been a substantial part of kind of marketing's overall campaign strategy. However, kind of those recent trends towards privacy and in particular kind of the attitudes against cookies has had a really significant impact on the way that you're able to actually execute some of those strategies.
Oh, for sure. So the shift to a cookieless world, as I mentioned before, is a hot button issue for marketers to address. What did you do to help the industry grapple with this monumental shift?
Yeah, so many of our private equity clients, and not really just our PE clients, but also across the associations and B2B space as well as B2C, we're starting to see the downstream impact of how some of these trends are impacting that marketing effectiveness that I mentioned earlier. So in particular, one thing that we've been keen in on is understanding how it's impacted by channel. So maybe it's by search versus email, but ultimately kind of where this is stemming from is kind of the leaders that we're working with are establishing some of their marketing budget allocation, and they want to know how we're bulletproof for that trend. So we wanted to ultimately find out directly from leaders, so be it Fortune 500, MarTech executives, as well as kind of experts in the industry, what approaches have been most successful to kind of navigate these trends. So we partner with Rep Data, a full service kind of data collection business for quantitative primary research, interviewed hundreds of marketers and talked to many industry experts about understanding what's ultimately impacting the industry the most.
Okay, so can you give us an overview of some of the key findings?
Yeah, so I like to kind of think about this in three areas. So on the first side is kind of what are marketers doing as it relates to strategies and actions, as well as kind of their technological change. On the second one, also understanding what channels are the most impacted and how they're starting to kind of reallocate the budget components related to that. And then lastly, in particular, something we were kind of keying in on as being so focused in the market research industry is understanding what is kind of the components as it relates to primary data, and if we're starting to kind of see a surge in importance there as well. So on the first side, as it relates to some of those strategic trends, marketers are starting to make an average of 5 changes to their technology stack to start to kind of address these cookieless gaps. So be it identity resolution, the ability to kind of track a user across those devices. They're introducing more than 75% are turning to artificial intelligence and other methods of identity resolution. And so identity resolution in particular is the ability to kind of associate the anonymous data across channels by using things like kind of browsing patterns and other kind of technical aspects with a single identifier so that you're understanding how a user is navigating and you're not kind of taking 2 different approaches. On the second side, what we're starting to see is leaders are experiencing the most pressure across social media and search. So both paid search and organic search. So rather than decreasing spend on these channels, what we're starting to see is marketers are doubling down on the most impacted areas. It's why we're seeing such a significant investment in the technology, be it AI, server-side tagging, or kind of an alternative approach to cookie tracking, and the sunsetting of data management platforms and technology that was so correlated to address these issues. And lastly, among both B2B and B2C respondents, so again, Fortune 500 leaders, marketers are reprioritizing market research. So panels, surveys, voice of customer initiatives to help identify some of those contextual segments for the retargeting purposes. In particular, there was significant differentiation in those B2B organizations that kind of focused and keyed in on these trends.
Okay. The point you made there about marketers doubling down on the most impacted areas, it's not just something marketers do, it's everyone. When change happens, you've got this change, so how do you recreate the past? Should you recreate the past or should you move forward? It's always a pretty challenging point to consider, isn't it?
Yeah, so the way we like to kind of bucket the two most impacted areas, and you kind of see this within the research on kind of that high, medium, low impact, is the top most impacted channels, again, are organic search, social media, and paid search. While kind of the secondary things that we're starting to see is over-the-top advertising, so kind of what you're seeing on Hulu or your on-demand content with your television, and email marketing. And what we're seeing there in particular is when it's difficult to track users kind of across these devices and mediums, it's just changed so much about how users kind of approach their budgeting. So in particular, right, talking to leaders on the B2C side, they're needing to define those cohorts for areas like paid search. So what are the demographic looks like? What are they searching for? Rather than relying on those learned algorithms alone, that has traditionally been kind of the focus as organizations approach paid ads. Instead, right, they're focusing on building these lookalike audiences and segments from the findings collected using kind of that traditional market research approach.
It's cool to see primary research getting a voice in this part of the business as well. So that's awesome. What technology and actions have differentiated leaders in building highly effective marketing organizations?
There were two major differences, and it's a great question, but I'd like to kind of separate out B2B and B2C. And the reason in particular of that is B2C is kind of a first mover in technology to address these trends. So on the B2C side, you see in particular the usage of a customer data platform, interaction, personalization technology, integrated to their content management system so that they're able to kind of float content across these channels and attribute it back to what ads or what content was having the most impact, has been just profound on the technology side. On the strategic side, so the actions they're taking as it relates to kind of addressing these trends, there's really 5 key areas. So one, they're kind of adopting server-side tracking. So server-side tracking allows kind of some of these similar tracking methods, but does not rely on the actual usage of a third-party cookie. Second, they're kind of focusing on artificial intelligence. So that's both to deploy the ads, but also kind of to understand kind of how users are navigating from device to device. The third one is related to identity resolution. So a similar component to kind of what we're seeing on AI, but more specifically on understanding how users and data across systems is kind of collaborating. And then the last two here, you're starting to see a little bit of reduction in paid media spend. So we got a lot of feedback from some of the leaders in some of our qualitative discussions that the original approach to the way that they looked at working with their ad partners and evaluating performance, it's been heavily impacted. It's a lot difficult to kind of read through that noise as it relates to performance. And then the last thing, which is it's critical for any organization, but on the B2C side in particular, and we'll maybe touch upon this a little bit as it relates to kind of some of the leaders that we talk to, but it's improving the data quality across your customer lists, across your prospect lists, so that you're able to kind of focus and kind of key in on these trends as it relates to kind of building your actual marketing automation plans. On the B2B side, it's a little bit more kind of lagging. You're starting to see that rather than having a customer data platform within their existing stack, you're starting to actually see some of these leaders implement a CDP today. And in particular, those that are doing so are starting to kind of see a differentiated perform. The areas in particular that were the strongest impactful from a technology perspective were marketing automation. So your Salesforce marketing automation, your Pardot, your Acoustic, whatever that system is, paired with the digital asset management tool to deliver that content kind of similar to what we're seeing on the B2C side. So all in all, some very strategic changes that we're starting to see from both organizations. In particular, B2B is testing some of these other channels. They're looking at Android, they're looking at podcasts, they're looking at alternative approaches. But again, there's a heightened importance on data quality, primary data in particular, and finding ways to identify what segments we're actually focused on as marketers.
Yeah, cool. It also sounds like the role of brand has been rejuvenated. I guess the need for investing in overall brand of your business, and then the performance of your adverts or whatnot in different channels would ultimately rise as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I'll give you kind of two examples from this. And when we're talking to kind of these leading organizations, you see kind of totally different kind of approaches depending on kind of where they're focused on from a brand and channel perspective. So, you know, maybe the first one we'll kind of talk about is we talk to what we would say is one of the most technologically mature organizations. And so that was a large e-commerce, direct-to-consumer facing sports and apparel industry. And so in that conversation, we were talking to the head of data, and he mentioned something so critical for their overall brand and campaign strategy. And that's the timing around major sporting events. So for, let's say your team just won a major event, you know, as an Indiana Pacers NBA fan, I may never know that feeling, but you need to be able to predict what that customer's interest and the needs are when they win that event or when they're going through that rough spot, so that you're not triggering an ad after they had a hard loss, or you're not kind of doing things that would not necessarily be in the best interest of the customer. And so having that data collected on the customer at the point of transaction, their favorite team, some of their interests, some of the history kind of as they're navigating the platform is really critical to kind of running an email campaign, let's say after your team wins the championship. On the second side, we talked a little bit to kind of the head of growth marketing on an e-commerce player. And so this is an area that's been in particular the most impacted. You know, a heavy reliance on tracking and a heavy reliance on triggering ads in other channels like search. And so what they focused on is talking about how they're shifting their entire marketplace focus and their brand strategy to kind of accommodate more direct customer feedback. So collecting voice of customer information at the point of sale, follow-up surveys, kind of within that overall buying journey, as well as information that they're collecting from a market research provider to understand and define those contextual cohorts so that they can kind of deliver those ads in those channels like search. So two completely different approaches, but driven ultimately by kind of the branding components that you touched upon earlier.
Mm. Yeah, cool. Your partner on the study, as we've talked about, the data collection firm Rep Data, we actually interviewed them on a past episode of this podcast. How did their methodology help you find the data you needed for the study? And just thinking about their approach, like what was it do you think would resonate with companies using them going forward?
Yeah, as we talk about primary research and just how it's becoming more prevalent in some of these privacy regulations and trends, we're going to need to start to define some of these more niche audiences so that companies can kind of build target audience understanding. So in particular, on the private equity side, when we're working with some of these lower middle market businesses, collecting data, not just about their customers, but also the market to get an understanding of kind of relative performance is very difficult, right? So even for this study, we needed a very specific audience. We were looking for 175 director level executive and C-level marketers at leading organizations across a representative sample for B2B, B2C, and then the B2B to C distribution channel. And so they were able to deliver that information across 15 verticals, ranging from financial services to technology, manufacturing, consumer goods. And this very specific audience can be very difficult to find with traditional recruitment methods. So with Rep Data, they have a more custom approach. They use a custom recruitment method for the study, which identifies individuals and verifies that each one meets that profiling criteria, boosting the data quality that is critical to kind of our organization when we're serving large clients that have an investment focus with what they're doing. And so we were able to collect that data in just 8 days, and the quality was far higher than what we have gone more a traditional route to kind of data collection.
Cool. Okay, so just one final question. What's in store for organizations who get it right in this new cookieless world? What does the future hold for them?
It's a great question, Michael. And in particular, I think one thing that kind of we touched upon with some of the leaders is a company or methodology that is able to kind of tie both of the aspects that we talked to. So primary data collection, voice of customer, market research. With some of these more advancements in marketing automation, decision-making technology is really what's going to differentiate some of these leaders. And so in particular, we actually asked some of these Fortune 500 leaders where they would allocate investment if they were to kind of focus in on this area. And decision-making technology and privacy and consent management were the most targeted areas, both in short term, so 2 to 3 years, and longer term, so 5+ years. And so what's driving that is this core focus of having a primary data architecture to establish and maintain the information of customers, prospects, whatever that stakeholder may be, across channels, but also ensure that the correct privacy and consent management is in place so that you're not triggering to an ad to another user who may have said that they're no longer want to receive this messaging just because you're using disparate systems or using a variety of data sources.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so if I can recap what we've talked about today, it's the evolution of it and impact of privacy in this digital age we're in, and how organizations are needing to change both process internally from a technology, a human, and a strategic perspective. We had a look at what the cookie is and what it's been used for historically. So you talked about cart abandonment, etc., and behaviors on websites, etc. We talked about what it's like to operate as a marketer with these cookies or without these cookies in place, and ultimately why it's a good thing for organizations to be investing in this new way. I guess it's the right thing to do as well when we're not collecting and storing data. You touched on some of the most impacted channels, for instance, organic search, social media, paid search, etc. You looked at the role of B2B versus B2C in terms of what actions have been taken by technology leaders. We looked at some of the the most impacted outcomes as well, by giving the two examples, one of the sports fashion label and also the e-commerce player too. You gave us a little bit of insight into the data collection firm Rep Data and how their approach really helped you target it and focus on those people you really wanted to talk to, and just how going for quality over quantity really helped with this part here. And also you gave us a bit of insight into what happens when we get it right. So I think that that's everything, Johann.
Yeah, it was great to join you. It's an exciting space to be in as it relates to being in market research.
Yeah, cool. And any final words before we close?
Nope.
Cool. So big thanks for joining us today. For the listeners out there, if you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe. Feel free to share it with others who might also find this helpful or useful, interesting. And please leave a review on the show as well. If you want to get in touch with Johann and the team, just a short, quick Google away, isn't it? So thanks so much for your time, and thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.